Final thoughts and anything that we think should be added or removed, and anything that you have not said that you think you want to say. This is your chance. So you can start with Maggie, and then move on down.
I was hoping to be the last one, but no. So I think a couple of interesting points have been raised, and I'll even start with what Pastor Charity said. I think one, even as Pastor Charity is speaking, there are things which you can see are very cross-cutting in terms of what the proponents of comprehensive sexuality education and what Pastor Charity is saying. So the teaching of the kids about their bodies, the importance of having respectful relationships, and the importance of being able to respect yourself and to respect others. So for me, I also tend to see there are areas where we align. It's very well aligned. It's just yes, so it's just how do we move past that? Because how do we move past that aspect that we all both want the same thing, which is we want to have children who are able to make the responsible choices from 0 to 18 years and above. We all want children who can be upright, standing citizens, who can be able to respect themselves and respect others. That's what we want in the end. And I would completely agree with Titus that one thing which is there is that we have the information and the evidence and the data. It's there and it's staring at our faces. And unfortunately, we are still refusing to accept that. And so for me, that I always find that being such a big issue when we see all these teenage pregnancies. In fact, I was watching news when this whole issue of Machakos came out, and some religious leaders were coming out and saying how they don't understand how these girls are getting pregnant, what is happening to them. And I kept, what do you mean you don't understand how they're getting pregnant? There's only one certain way to get pregnant. So it's how do you make sure that you're not so far removed, and also what, because I do believe the religious bodies have a role to play, and I don't think we can definitely sideline them. People respect a lot what the church says. And I think because of that, the church has such a huge responsibility to be giving accurate information, the right information to people. And I think the church is failing people by denying and not giving them that proper information. And I think one other thing which also kept coming out is this whole issue of the context. Right now, we're living in a day and age as well where we have internet. All our children are on the phones, not all middle class children at least are on their phones. And I think Pastor Charity said this. Society has been sexualized. That we can see in media, we can see on TV, on print, and everywhere. But children don't understand. They're constantly being bombarded by all this sexualized imagery. On the phones, there's access to pornography, which can be intentional and sometimes it's very unintentional. But there are so many unregulations, poor regulations in terms of how they use social media and how they use the internet, which they do not understand. So it's how do you make sure we are also stepping in and saying, okay, we understand that we're in this day and age. This is here with us to stay. So how can we make sure that you can be able to safely utilize this? Because I've had stories where I have a friend, a colleague with I think an 18-year-old or 17-year-old sister who's on Facebook. And he was telling me how one day he had her phone and he started getting a lot of notifications on her phone. So he decided to just check. And when he checked, he noticed that the young sister is being sent these explicit images by men from all over the world who are also asking her and coercing her and telling her, please send us like naked pictures of yourself, please do this. And every time she kept saying no, they kept insulting her. And then you could also see in the tone of the conversation, she was feeling bad that she was saying no and she was rejecting them. I mean, the day and age we're living in right now, the vulnerabilities that the young children are facing, it's incredible. And that's why we're seeing HIV is still very high among young people. We're seeing these teenage pregnancy rates. So I think it's time to just be able to stop burying our heads in the sand, like everyone else is saying. We have the data, we have the information that can guide us, and we even have the tools and the resources. We actually just need to do something about it.
Okay. I'm going to have Pastor Charity talk last so that she can respond to everything. So, Patrick.
Really enjoyed this. First, I would like to pose a question to Florence that when she's doing her closing remark, I would like to know how can we as parents contextualize the sexuality education in a family setting as we continue raising our children. I would like you to address that because you have had more experience with that. For me, I think there's one thing I support Charity on, is that we need a more wholesome education. I don't know if that's the responsibility of the church, but there are so many aspects of the human body, the intellect, the mind, and I know that the church is also is asking why are we only focusing on sex. By me, I think they should ask why are we not also focusing on the other things. If the church really believes that the body, the mind, the intellect is part of what should be educated, and they think that should be in the curriculum, maybe basic philosophy, critical thinking, if all those things are things we need, then instead of just opposing sexuality, they should just then include all those things in addition to the sexual education. But I think just to stand out and say that the sexual education bill is narrow, which it might be, because it's not focusing on the intellect and whatever, is also a narrow way of looking at it. We should also do the other things then in that case. Then
just a correction, sorry, it does focus on other things. It focuses on empathy, it focuses on relationship building, on consent, on critical thinking.
Yes, I support Florence in saying the church, therefore, just saying that it's focusing on one thing is also incorrect information. Let me just say that. My biggest issue with how my church has dealt with this CSC is that they have thrown out the baby with the water. I have an issue with that. If one or two things are not okay with the bill, then tell us as part of the congregation how to deal with it, or where we'd use our civil, is it right, or ability to influence change. And lastly, I think on my part, I have tried my level best, not my level best, but I have run a youth leadership program. I have tried to do what Titus is doing in a small way, and I think also the back lies on me. I can go out, I can go out of my way, talk to a few people here and there, talk to the people I hike with, people I go for cycling with, people in my circles, because I have learned a lot, especially as a man, about sexuality from places I didn't think I would get it. I have found very sober-minded people, even when we go for sports, who have said, "They don't do that." I remember in high school, a person literally telling me it's not okay to cut collar, and you shouldn't, just because you are a group of men, you shouldn't. It's shameful. Don't do it. And therefore, I think we can do it right where we are. If a man, and I'm speaking because I think society has an issue because men have decided to do nothing. And therefore, as a man, I think it's my responsibility to speak about other things I see men doing that I do not think are okay. So just to sit down and say it's not my responsibility would be also choosing to do nothing. So lastly, that's my call. I think each of us should try and see if there's something they can do about it. Back to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Titus, and then Florence, and then Charity.
Thank you. First of all, I'd just like to say that we are not attacking the church or anyone. I just think that there's a lot of misinformation. And right now, I'll just go back to say that whoever is in this panel, whoever is watching this recording, if you have someone in government close to you, tell them that there are people on the ground doing the work that they should be doing. So the best that they could do is put more resources, give us more resources, provide us with more opportunities. There are so many young people who are educated out there. They need training, they need support. We need equipment, like tools to show these young people, projectors and these other aids, just to show that this is the situation. Let's give these young people a chance to fulfill their ambitions. The best way is when they have the information, they can make proper decisions. And also, let's support the idea that there's data that we can lean on and the data that we can work on. Let's not bury our heads in the sand. And then there's this thing of saying that everyone has to deal with their children the way they know. So you might lean on the church, you might lean on this. The reality is our children are now more connected than ever. You might realize that the child will always be at home. If you say, right now, if you say the child should be at home at 5 p.m., they'll be there at 5 p.m. But what are they doing on their phones? So you might think they're in a very safe space, but they're just in their homes, they're not safe. So also as parents, as people who are close to children, we also need to play a part. We also need to, most of this information is not readily available, and not unless you look for it. So as parents, we need to equip ourselves so that we are the first people that the children can learn. If they come up with a question, we should be ready to answer that question. We should be knowledgeable. So this is a challenge to everyone in this panel and whoever is going to watch that. We can blame the church, the government, all these systems, the patriarchy, perpetrators, but it starts with me. And that's how I want to end my remarks. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you, Titus, for that. Also, thank you for the work that you're doing. I hope the government will heed your call and open up the project that you were doing. Florence?
I think I'll start by responding to Gashao. I think listen to your child. When they ask a question, be very keen on knowing, asking them, how did you know that? I can give you an example. I was in a toilet, and those of you who have small children, maybe Gashao, they go opening the door when you're in the toilet. They don't wait for you to come out. So I was in the toilet, and they all came, opened the door. So I told them, please wait outside. But then they stood there looking at me. Then the oldest says, but mommy, how do you susu? Why are you seated? So I told them I'll explain when I come out. Please close the door. Of course, they closed the door. They stayed outside. In my head, I'm thinking of how do I respond to this one? So I came out, and he was 4. The other one was 2. So I said, mommy, you have told us you'll tell us how you susu. So I was like, okay. So I told them, girls susu like that. And then they were like, but so you susu from where you poo-poo? I was like, no. So because now I wanted to know where their head is going. What do they understand? And then I said no. So he said, what do you susu with then? So I had to respond. I said, no, we susu with a vagina. He said, oh, so boys have penis and girls have vaginas. I said, yes. And that was it. It didn't process. It's us adults who process it to mean something else that is not. And sometimes I feel that our church, and I've challenged my church to have these conversations open on the pulpit, open with the young people. Call me if they are afraid. And I've had such conversations in church. And let's speak about it. It does not mean you're less saved, or you don't know Christ, or you are going away from the doctrine. You are actually speaking what is there. The other thing, so age appropriate also just means, what does my child know? When they come to ask them, how did you find out this? Who told you this? And then now from there, you respond from a point of, this is the right information. And don't go further than that, beyond what they asked. Yes, because then now you will be clouding their image. The other thing, I agree with Titus, we need a lot of resources. We need a lot of resources. To also go into schools, we know that teachers are not equipped to do all this. They have all these other subjects to deal with. So they need support from external people like Titus, myself, and others who are well versed to talking to children, to speak to children. So we need to open up our schools to be able to offer that life skills part so that kids might know. All the schools I went to, kids were speaking for the first time about violations. I know we talked about teenage pregnancies, but most of them were talking about their first sexual encounter was with a person who is either a relative, was with a person who forced themselves to them. So it's not something that they said, oh, let me try to find myself, let me try to get acceptance. It was not that. Most of them were saying, it is so an uncle. It is my father. It is my stepfather. It is my neighbor. It is my teacher. It is the watchman in our school. So because we know that the first sexual encounter will be forced, it is so important that we give our children the right information. From the 25 conversations that I did, I want to just mention a few and statements from the kids. I got this book. It is called Hear Our Stories, Take Action. So we need to hear our children and we need to take action. Whether we are government, whether we are parents, whether we are religious institutions, wherever we are as adults, because it's an adult thing that we are supposed to do, we need to take responsibility. So this is a question somebody, a 15-year-old is saying, if you have been raped by a close family member and your parents do not want the person to be reported, what is the best way to handle the situation? Another question, if you get pregnant after rape, should you abort because you want to hide the truth about what happened? That is another 15-year-old. What if your mom divorces your dad and gets married to another man who rapes you at the age of 11? Do you still consider yourself a virgin? And what advice can you give in such cases? So our children, they are more worried about staying as virgins because that's what we push for, even as a church, to the extent they do not want to report when something happens, because then you will know they're not a virgin. Why should we as a society put our children in that scenario where they have to choose whether to report or not to report because we have insisted that girls need to be virgins? Why should we put our children in a space where they're saying, I want to abort to hide the truth of what happened? And ideally, it could be somebody who raped them. And if we only give them the information they need, whether it's contraception, whether it's information, they'll know when this happens, I can call this number. When this happens, I can go this place. So we are pushing for, I'm pushing for safe spaces in our schools, safe spaces in places where children feel safe, including those small community sessions we create. Safe spaces for children to get information. Safe spaces for children to shout or sound an alarm when something is off. Safe spaces for children not to be judged. And I wish those spaces could be church so that they are not judged and given the right information and taken for services that they need. And this is possible. There's a policy at the table of Ministry of Education around creating safe spaces in school and then having one-stop centers near schools so that if it's my grandfather or it's something that is happening at home, I have a safe space in school to speak. If it's something happening in my school, I have the one-stop center to run to. So please, let's make places safe for children not to start to choose. An 11-year-old should not be choosing about whether to abort or speak about something that has happened. That is not acceptable because we want them to be virgins. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Florence. That's very well said. Charity?
Wow. You guys are great thinkers, and those are very good proposals that you have. I agree that we need to have information to our children. We need to provide our children with information. Having no information is not an option, and neither is providing explicit information an option. We need to find the in between, and I think we need to get to a point where we work together and not look at each other as the enemy. I think even from this panel, we can even come up with a task force to come up with a curriculum, because we the curriculum that ultimately we all want is one that will provide our children with information that will help them to know how to respond to what happens in their lives and to make decisions that will build them in their future. So ultimately, what I would say, the curriculum needs to be value based. It needs to be based on values that we have as a society, what we want to see in our children, in the future generations, so that, and that will need the input of all of us. Titus has been working with the young people. That is experience that I don't have, and it's something that would be very useful. Florence has experience in dealing with very different girls and different cases. We need to work together. I think that's what I'm coming out with from this discussion. We need to work together and hear each other out and say, okay, what is it that you don't agree with in this curriculum? And I can read some things for you of what was shocking me about. I don't know if we have enough time for me to actually read verbatim what is being
Go ahead.
proposed.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, like from the 0 to 4, sexuality. It's a table, and it's written information. Give information about enjoyment and pleasure when touching one's own body, early childhood, masturbation. Give information about discovery of one's own body and own genitals. Give information about the fact that enjoyment of physical closeness is a normal part of everyone's life. And then on skills, enable children to gain an awareness of gender identity, talk about unpleasurable feelings in one's own body, express own needs, wishes, and boundaries, for example, in the context of playing doctor. And then attitudes, a positive attitude towards one's body with all its functions, positive body image, respect for others, curiosity regarding one's own body and others' body. I mean, masturbation for 0 to 4 year olds, I don't think I would want that being taught to my child. So I think what we should do is, could we sit down and say, this is what I don't agree with, this is what should not be part of this, this is what I would want to see, so that we, instead of throwing out the baby with the water, let's remove what is poisonous to our children, and come up with something that we ourselves, because okay, what I've seen with this, it's something that was proposed from, is it UN or whoever, UNESCO. Why can't we, as Kenya, sit down and say, we are not borrowing, okay, there is those things that are based on evidence and all that. Can we look at it? Can we make it our own, rather than accepting something from outside, which values are different in the West from ours? Can we do something that that is in line with what we believe in, what we want to see in our generation, rather than borrowing a whole thing, hook, line, and sinker, and then we end up destroying our generation. I think that's what we need to do going forward. And I agree that the child, as Titus was saying, as Titus was saying, and as Florence was saying, we need to create safe spaces. We need to create platforms where children can actually ask questions. They're not afraid to ask. They're not afraid to question. Right now we are at a point where we are, even in the church, we are like, we need to even allow our own young people to ask questions about their faith, because they need to know what they believe in, rather than blanketing and saying you can't ask that. they'll go out and look for the information elsewhere. So I agree with Titus. I agree with what Florence. We need to protect our children. We need to provide the information that is needed. And as a church, yes, we have the responsibility. And as I said from the earlier on, we failed when we just kicked it out and we didn't provide an alternative. And and so we need to find something that works in between, rather than having no information and the other extreme of having explicit information. Let's find the middle ground together so that when we are doing this, we have everyone on board, we are supporting one another, we have the government, we have the church, we have other the societies that are actually civil societies that are advocating for these things. Let's work together. And so what I would say as a parting shot, in terms of when I was going through the content and how they are describing the outcomes of this CSC in the US, because something that has already been implemented. Yes, they are saying that teenage pregnancies have gone down, and they are talking about delayed indulgence. But in terms of suicide, mental health issues, depression issues, abortion issues are rising, because instead of dealing with it's not just about eliminating the pregnancy issue. Let's look at other aspects of this person. What are they looking for? And then we also need to separate issues like abuse. That is different. We need to approach that differently. We need to approach issues of poverty and people having to feel like they have to consent to sexual favors so that they can get their livelihood. That also needs to be tackled separately. So I'll read you a quote from a document I was reading, and it says, it's Corrie ten Boom from the book The Hiding Place, and it says, "And so, seated next to my father in the train compartment, suddenly asked, 'Father, what is sex in?' He turned to me. He turned to look at me, as he always did when answering a question. But to my surprise, he said nothing. At last, he stood up, lifted his traveling case off the floor, and set it on the floor. 'Will you carry it off the train, Corrie?' he said. I stood up and tugged at it. It was crammed with the watches and spare parts he had purchased that morning. 'It's too heavy,' I said. 'Yes,' he said, and it would be a pretty poor father who would ask his little girl to carry such a load. It's the same way, Corrie, with knowledge. Some knowledge is too heavy for children. When you are older and stronger, you can bear it. For now, you must trust me to carry it for you.' And so I think what I also advocate for is we need to protect parental rights over their children, because that's another aspect that CSE is trying to overlook. Children belong to their parents. At the end of the day, they should be given they should have the right to these decisions that children are life-altering decisions that children are being encouraged to take. So, yeah, that's what I would say. I think this is a discussion that I would like to continue to have, and we need to work together and get the way forward for our children, for the next generation. Yeah.
Okay.
Cynthia,
I
we
can
can't go
see.
ahead and say something else.
I can see. I can see Florence shaking her head. I
Yes,
can see
I think
Maggie
that,
wanting. So
yeah.
just a few points to note. So I hate to call you out, but you see, again, on misinformation, that is exactly what happened right now. There is no part where 0 to 4 years old it advocates for masturbation, but it is a normal part of growth that children touch their genitals. It is talking about that enables them to know. That's one of those things. So when you make comments like that offhandedly, then yes, even me, if I was a parent and you told me that at 4 my child is learning about masturbation, then I would be opposed. But that isn't actually what's on the document. That's not what's on the document, and that's my problem with a lot of times. So it's just it's a problem for me. The other thing is, I think that must have been.
Can I just? Sorry,
Maggie has something. Maggie has something to add.
Because I'm looking at the document in front of me as well, and it does not. There's no. In fact, everything with regards to sexuality starts at 5 years, 5 to 8
Exactly.
years. And at
In
that
Kenya,
point,
they even do it from Form 3. They don't even start.
And note
Kenya,
that
they don't
can I
even
even
start
just
there. Go
exactly.
to schools,
And
you will
this is
see
just
where life skill starts. It's
I
only
agree.
it's only HIV that starts at grade 5.
Yeah,
that's
and
very
even on
goodness.
the UNESCO document, even on the UNESCO outline, that is the guideline for most countries, the age at which CSE starts is at 5 years old, 5 to 8, and it doesn't talk about masturbation at that age. It doesn't talk about pleasure at that age. It doesn't. So that's my problem. Is there's this misinformation, and it's thrown out with statements like that, and people make decisions based on statements like that, which brings me to my point of the church. We live in a society where, whether we like it or not, religious leaders hold a lot of power. They do. They hold a lot of power. They hold a lot of influence. So I think it's so vital that proper information is communicated. That you tell people what is on the document, even if you don't like it. Tell them the truth of what is on the document. Don't misconstrue it so that they accept it. If it is written ABCD, tell them it's written ABCD and not ADCB, so that they can accept what you're saying. And that's been my problem. Is a lot of times when I see it, they put a lot of half truths and whole lies. And so for the public who are not reading these things, because honestly, that document is quite long. It's 139 pages. Not many people are going to read it. I only have to go by what, and a lot of people rely on their religious leaders. So when you don't tell, when you misrepresent information, people make decisions based on that misrepresentation, and then that becomes a problem. Additionally, I think that.
Can I add that?
Yes.
Just quickly?
Yes.
And just to add that, something very important is that this document is not cut and paste. No one is saying, take the UNESCO document and let's put it into the Kenya curriculum, which, as Florence is also rightly reiterating, is that currently nothing is available in the Kenyan curriculum that talks to young people about sexuality education from that age of 5 to whatever. It mainly starts at Form 3. So the idea of this document is that it's a guideline, which is very important to note. This is a guideline, which means that we are allowed to pick and choose based on our context, based on our how culturally relevant it is, to make sure that we pick and choose things which can be adaptable and used in the Kenyan context. So looking at the document and saying this is what we want to teach, that's wrong, because the document is a guideline. It's supposed to be a guideline to say these are all the spectrum of things that you can talk to children about when it comes to sexuality education. However, as a country, you should work together, the government, civil society, religious bodies, parents, teachers, to be able to actually come together and say, okay, these are the things that we want to include. And there's another point which was raised, that CSE wants to replace parents, which is very wrong. If you actually look through that document as a guideline, one of the key things it emphasizes is the importance of parents being involved in the process, that it's supposed to be complementary to the values that parents are teaching children. And it explicitly mentions that the family is very crucial in terms of the values, because that's where most children start getting their values. So I think it's very important, like Cynthia said, we need to be very objective and not misconstrue things in a way that makes people have the wrong message. Sorry, thank you. I'm done.
Okay, I have to say this.
That's
we say that this information came from the West. The same way we say that the clothes people used to walk naked until the white people came. We had our own places of clothing, but even now you will say, I'm supposed to dress a certain way. Yet these things came from the West. The same argument will be placed when you're teaching religion to an atheist, or you're telling them about Christianity, you're telling them about Christ. They'll tell you it also came from the West. So this argument of things coming from the West, we cannot accept. Yet we accept Christianity because the history of Christianity says that some white people came, missionaries, they taught us. Then, some of us found it. We got saved. We believe in Jesus. But it came from the West. So the argument that these concepts come from the West is not going to be useful. And also the thing of saying that when it comes to sexual abuse, that is something else. We can treat it differently. When it comes to poverty, no, we treat it differently. How will it differentiate in a class? I would go to classes of a high-end school. Am I supposed to assume all these people come from a rich family so they don't have economic issues to deal with? I'll be very wrong as a person. I'm supposed to treat these children in a way that I respect them and I'm giving them information that will be helpful to them. Not saying that, because we cannot wait for an abuse to happen and then we say, okay, now when it has happened, this is what you do. We need to be able to say, these are the things. Well, if your uncle is telling you this, it is not acceptable. If your father is touching you this way, it is not acceptable. So that now we look at all these things. Well, my dear, people believe that Christianity came from the West. I've seen Charity, what you've written. And people say white people brought it. Dr. Livingstone, Dr. Kraft, and everybody else. So let's not
There's a whole argument happening in the chat.
Yes, we can't pretend here that everything that we borrow, because if we had a solution, we would have it.
It's true.
We can't be blaming the West. We shouldn't have that argument of the West.
Yeah. Okay. To finish this. So additionally onto what I was saying about the church, I was trying to get this point across and I forgot it. So I watched this interview and I think it was on NTV, and the pastor was saying, this is not our culture. We should not talk about things that children should not know. And then he went on to say that the figures that have been put out there are inaccurate and therefore we shouldn't teach sexual education. And my argument is, if one girl is pregnant, if one child is abused, that is enough to have comprehensive sexual education. We can't wait and say, okay, we'll wait for 1,000 girls to get abused or 5,000 girls to get pregnant. No, there's no threshold. If one child's life is at risk, then we should take the steps. We shouldn't say that that's too much. So I think that the church also needs to embrace data, because a lot of times, like Titus is saying, there is data out there to inform our decisions, and we're just not doing it. And I think that's one of the things we need to do. The other thing is, I was quite disappointed that I wasn't able to get a teacher for this panel, because it's not, I don't think the conversation is full without having a teacher, because they're the ones who would have to deliver it. I couldn't get one to speak publicly, but what I gathered is that we already have a problem, which is another social problem, where we don't pay our teachers enough. We don't pay our essential workers enough, so we don't pay teachers enough. And then now you want to add this onto them. And already this is a topic that is quite uncomfortable for most people. So teachers would have to retrain and, go over, and you're adding this to them. So we need to motivate our teachers. We need to pay our teachers properly. We need to train our teachers properly so that they can be able to give this information. We'll be talking about this in another video with HPV, but then this is really, really important. This conversation could go on forever. In fact, we've gone 1 hour overboard. So I'm just going to take this chance to say thank you so much to everybody who's come. Thank you so much for being open-minded, for sharing your views, for the arguments we've had. I hope that everybody has learned something from this, and I hope that we can expand these conversations to our families, our friends, and to churches and other places where we have influence and a voice. For our audience, thank you so much for joining.